Good afternoon. Welcome to the event number 1, UN and the International Cooperation in the Era of Trump. My name is Kazuhiro Maeshima, Sophia University. I'm the moderator of this panel. Also, I'm operating advisor of USJI. Thank you very much for your participation. Well, prior to introducing our panel, let me start with the introduction of USJI itself. USJI is a research consortium consists of currently 9 leading Japanese universities with a strong collaboration with a business sector. USJI is working to produce practical results based upon a sound academic base. This USJI Week is an occasion in which each member university presents their research and discuss important issues of both social and natural science. Also, please remind that we are videotaped for the internet dissemination from the USJI website later. Well, regarding this panel, this panel is aiming to explore current international cooperation policy and the relationship between the United States and the United Nations after the event of the Trump presidency. We have experts for this. I just introduced to me Yasuhiro Ueki, one of my most trusted colleagues at Sophia and my senior senpai at Sophia. Dr. Ueki worked for United Nations for more than 30 years. And now teaching at Sophia. His research interest includes the United Nations Charter, the UN peace mediation activities, and the UN counterterrorism strategy and its implementation and changes. Also, Ms. Barbara Crossette. She is a very well-known American journalist, and in her long career at the New York Times, she served as an editor and the paper's chief correspondent in Southeast Asia and South Asia. She was the Times United Nations Bureau Chief from 1994 to 2001. And now she is the correspondent, United Nations correspondent for the nation, and also serves as a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. And today, actually, we are scheduled to have Dr. Edward Luck from Columbia University, but unfortunately, he has been injured today, and he's not available this time. Sorry about that. Well, let's move on to this panel. Regarding the structure of this panel, I will first very briefly talk about the purpose of this panel. Then, Hiro and Barbara will talk more detail in the issue. And then three of us will discuss once again, and then open the Q&A and open the discussion to the program. We have 30 minutes Q&A sessions after our talk. First, let me start with why we want to talk about this issue. We have only one answer, because of Mr. Trump. During and after the historical 2016 campaign, President Trump has promised a very unprecedented. So his campaign promise has been very unprecedented, and among the unprecedented, I'm very low-tech guy. Okay. One of the most surprising about his policies is regarding the international order or international organization. These are one of his promise. This is basically what President Trump, our candidate Trump, and President Trump has been saying and implementing. First, he has been very critical of international organization itself. NATO is obsolete, and United Nations is very dysfunctional. And he preferred one by one deals with countries over multilateralism. Protectionism is his main focus on his national economic nationalism. He's pretty much against free trade and open market economy. He already withdrew from TPP, and he is now, his Trump administration is now revisiting NAFTA and South Korea's free trade agreement. In his mind, international trade is not a positive sum, it's a zero-sum bargain game. And another thing we kind of surprised is that he is not denouncing authoritative leaders such as Duterte in Philippines or Putin in Russia. That is very unprecedented in the United States president, because the United States president is an icon of democracy, has been an icon of democracy. President Trump is pretty much put emphasis on hard powers such as economy and military strength over soft powers. All of them are kind of doubts on liberal international order. And this doubts on liberal international order is maybe from the everything but Barack Obama ideas during the campaign. And also the logical conclusion of polarized politics between the liberal and the conservative and the Democrats, and between the Democrats and the Republicans. But anyway, his radical platform is, at least it's an agent of change. How the Japanese people feel and think, or Japanese people or other countries' people feel and think about irrelevant international orders ideas of Mr. Trump. And this is a small number, sorry about that, but it's from the Pew Research Center. Views of President Trump's proposed policies, and this is a disapproved number. And so the 72% of Japanese people feel that withdraw U.S. support from international climate exchange agreements, withdraw U.S. support, 70% of Japanese people feel that Donald Trump's ideas of withdrawing Paris climate change is a bad thing. And also, withdraw from the Donald Trump's ideas of withdrawing major trade agreements are very bad. 66% of Japanese people feel so, and the number is not so different from other countries. This is a comparison between the Trump administration and the Obama administration. How those presidents to do the right thing regarding the world affairs. If the color is going to be, if the color becomes green, then the president is supporting, doing the right thing for the world affairs. And we couldn't see any green thing here. And Barack Obama's case, of course, we can see it. I mean, in Japan, well, it's green, not significant, not dark green, it's a light green, but at least Obama and Trump has a quite difference in at least for the mind of Japanese President Obama and President Trump has a clear difference in their direction in the international order. Well, I should move on to Hiro regarding the US and the United Nations, and also in Japan's relationship with the United Nations.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hiro Ueki, as Professor Maeshima has indicated. I've worked for the UN for roughly 30 years, in 2014, I left the UN and became a professor at Sophia University, where I've been teaching since. During my UN days, actually, I spent most of my days in the Department of Public Information, explaining the work of the UN, and worked in the office of the spokesperson or spokesman for the Secretary General in the 1990s, roughly 4.5 years. So at the time, first the Secretary General was Trotsky, then changed to Kofi Annan. I also served in the field, starting in Namibia, when Namibia was going through a transition to independence. I also went to South Africa as a member of the UN political mission to supervise the democratic election over there, in which Nelson Mandela was elected. I went to East Timor, and I was a political affairs officer as well as acting deputy spokesperson as well, which led eventually to independence of East Timor. I was UN spokesman for the UN verification, monitoring verification and inspection mission called AMOVIC. And the IAEA, we looked for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq prior to Iraq war. So I have some interesting overseas missions working for the UN. Today's theme is my part is U.S. and Japan's multilateral diplomacy in the Trump era. First, I'd like to explain the U.S. side and then Japan. Now, here first, I'd like to give you a little sort of a more historic outlook on how the U.S. has dealt with the UN. The U.S. attitude or policy toward the UN has been like a pendulum swing, oftentimes going from one extreme to the other. Now, the U.S., of course, was the promoter or promoted the founding of the UN, and President Roosevelt was a very strong advocate of creating an international organization that would replace the League of Nations and lead this new international collective security. And the UN was the leading member of the UN from the very beginning. So very strong support of the UN. But as you know, President Roosevelt passed away before the UN was founded. So President Truman took over. And he also strongly supported the UN because the US still at that time had a majority, even in the General Assembly. Besides, the US was a permanent member of the Security Council. So the way the UN was envisaged was to maintain international peace and security through collective security centered around the 5 major powers, including the US. And those 5 major powers became the permanent members of the Security Council. Now, President Truman was the one who invited the UN to New York. And there were also discussions as to whether the UN should be located. And eventually, Mr. Rockefeller offered to provide the site to the UN, which was a determining factor for UN headquarters to be built in New York. And I think that was a very wise decision because had the UN been again, like the League of Nations, been based in Geneva, in Europe, I don't know how much commitment the UN, the US could have made to the UN. Now, during the President Eisenhower's days, President Truman's days, Korean War broke out in June 1950. And at that time, the Soviet Union was absent in the Security Council over China's representation issue. So in the absence of the Soviet Union, the U.S. pushed forward to creating the first so-called multinational operation under the U.S. command in Korea, and helped legitimize the U.S. participation in Korean War. So the UN was very useful in legitimizing the U.S.-led war against North Korea in the war. Now, during President Eisenhower's days, the U.S. attitude to the UN was a bit mixed. As you may recall, Senator McCarthy created a kind of hysteria against anyone who was considered to be a sympathizer to communism, the Soviet Union. And in fact, the UN suffered from this, and the US demanded setting up an office in the UN to screen any American UN staffers whether to test their loyalty. And in fact, surprisingly, that FBI office in the UN continued to exist until the mid-1980s. And finally, there was a time when Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, and the Cold War was coming to an end. So finally, that office was withdrawn. But it took so many years to test the American staffers' loyalty to the US. But the Suez crisis happened in 1956, in which the U.S. supported the creation of the first UN peacekeeping force to deploy to Sinai, and in fact found a common ground with the Soviet Union at the time, because it was the UK and France that vetoed any UN action to deal with the Suez crisis in the Security Council. So the matter was brought to the General Assembly under the Uniting for Peace resolution, and it was the General Assembly that created the first UN peacekeeping force. There were peacekeeping observer missions already in the 1940s, but the UN peacekeeping force in which troops participated was first created by the General Assembly. So it's a very interesting historical development. And President Kennedy initially supported the UN in the Cuban crisis. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, in fact, at the time, Mr. Utant from Burma was a Secretary General, and Utant helped sort of providing his offices between the US and the Soviet Union, and helped manage the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for that contribution, he was formally, he replaced Daga Hammarskjöld, but he was formally made Secretary General of the UN. But Kennedy was assassinated, and Johnson took over, and then, as you know, Vietnam War progressed. And Mr. Utant was critical of this Vietnam War, and for that reason, US became very cruel to the UN. President Nixon, again, Vietnam War widened to involve Cambodia, and eventually left the office. President Ford took over, but then 1970s, there was a major shift in the world power configuration because of the emergence of so-called oil powers. The developing countries also began to dominate the General Assembly, and the so-called Third World kind of gained more power in the 1970s, and that led to the adoption in the General Assembly of a resolution equating Zionism with racism, and the U.S. very reacted strongly to this resolution because the U.S. was a strong supporter of Israel. So this was a time when the U.S. started resorting to the use of veto in the Security Council because the U.S. was really in the minority in many areas. So during President Ford days, the U.S. attitude towards the UN was not that positive. Then came President Carter, and he promoted human rights in his diplomacy. And in 1977, in fact, the first UN economic sanction, in this case arms embargo, was imposed on South Africa. Because South Africa at the time, as you know, had established racial segregation policy called apartheid, totally segregating white population from the rest. It was just amazing. I've seen actually actual apartheid site in Namibia and in South Africa in the 1990s, 1989 when I was in Namibia. But just amazing how people are segregated by race. Anyway, so President Carter was more supportive of the UN because the UN was a very strong supporter and promoter of human rights. Now, President Reagan was not very kind to the UN. He, like President Trump in a way, advocated very strong military to win over the Soviet Union. And also, there was an NGO still that exists called Heritage Foundation, which is very, very anti-UN. So President Reagan was very cool to the UN, but I think he may have been the first president who came to the UN every year to make a speech. So the UN was in a way useful to him. President George Bush, the father, he was the only US president who had served as US ambassador to the UN. So he has actually a very good diplomatic sense. And I believe that he advised his son, George Bush, against invading Iraq, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's been in China, that wasn't correct.
That's right, he was also in China, US ambassador to China.
Mm-hmm.
Also CIA guy.
Anyway, yeah. And he was actually the one who created a multinational force called UNITAF that was sent to Somalia, which was going through an enormous famine in the early 1990s. And towards the end of his presidency, he proposed to send this multinational force to help protect the humanitarian workers who are providing humanitarian assistance to those who are suffering from the famine. Because Somalia itself had been going through clan warfare, many clans, Somali clans fighting with each other, like Japan in the 16th century. Then came President Clinton. He initially supported the UN, but then the so-called Black Hawk Down, you may have seen the movie, the US Rangers suffered a very significant loss during a raid to General ID's forces in Mogadishu. And he decided to retreat from the UN peacekeeping, and that spelled the end of the UN peacekeeping mission in Somalia. And because of that retreat, the following year, 1994, you know what happened? Genocide in Rwanda. And if the US had committed itself to dealing with that genocide, it could have been prevented. Because those who are carrying out genocide were carrying machetes and small weapons, and, but the US, because of the Somalia debacle, decided against involvement in the genocide. And in fact, Ambassador Rice, Susan Rice, later regretted for the US not having done anything to deal with it. When she was the UN ambassador, she mentioned that. Because at the time, she was on the National Security Council. Anyway, in the 1990s, the U.S. in fact supported the UN operation in East Timor, but in the case of Kosovo, decided to initially ignore the UN and decided to carry out a NATO attack on Serbia to deal with the Kosovo issue. So during the Clinton days, actually, it was the U.S. approach attitude towards the UN was quite a mixed one. Now, George W. Bush initially supported the UN, particularly following the 9/11, which happens to be today. The U.S. went in to defeat the Taliban and entrusted the UN to negotiate the Bonn Agreement to create a new legitimate Afghan government. And then the entrusted the UN to follow up on the post-Taliban Afghanistan. But then the U.S. went into Iraq in 2003. President Bush did try the UN approach first, but we all knew that their intent was to attack Iraq later, which happened. So unfortunately, our efforts to advocate and find weapons of mass destruction went nowhere, but didn't help stop that war. But I think this Iraq war happened to be a big mistake to the U.S. Because half the world opposed the U.S. attack on Iraq, and that the Iraq war eventually spawned the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which then eventually developed into ISIS. So you can see historical developments, very negative developments, on the basis of one U.S. decision at the time. And then George Bush tried, he hated U.S. involvement in nation building, but after the Iraq war, the U.S. ended up doing it, and didn't quite succeed, didn't do quite well, so they turned to the UN. So President Bush, in a way, had kind of mixed feelings about the UN. He was never favored the UN, but he used the UN when that was convenient to him. Now, President Obama was a very strong supporter of multilateralism, and he promoted the climate change agreement and so forth. Other than the UN, the TPP, and so forth. Now comes the Trump administration. Now, his approach is basically a doctrine of retreat. And based on his America First policy, he kind of shuns kind of multilateralism, and that was already manifested in his decision to withdraw from TPP, as well as from the climate Paris agreement, climate change agreement in Paris. And also, he seemed to show some less commitment to NATO, arguing that other NATO countries should pay more for NATO and so forth. And now I think there's a discussion as to whether the U.S. should withdraw from NAFTA altogether. And also even the free trade agreement with South Korea. And this comes at a time when the U.S. needs South Korea in dealing with North Korea. So I don't know exactly what's happening in the administration, but overall, some call it doctrine of retreat. Now, the Trump administration proposed deep cuts to the State Department budget, which is actually being resisted by Congress, by Senate. But because the U.S. State Department budget pays for international organizations, including NATO and the UN organizations, the significant cut would tremendously affect the U.S. financial contribution to international organizations. And also the Trump administration is proposing a cut in UN peacekeeping budget. US assessment for UN peacekeeping budget from 20+% to 25%, saying that current current share of the US peacekeeping budget is unfair. Now, somebody in the US administration is forgetting that the US is a permanent member in the Security Council, and the reason why the permanent members, not just the US, paying a higher share of the UN budget is because they are the permanent members in the Security Council, and they are the ones who decide what peacekeeping mission to establish and so forth. It's a General Assembly that has the powers of power of purse. But when the Security Council established the new peacekeeping mission or renews its mandate, it's the General Assembly that has to pay. So pretty much it's up to the permanent members decide whether to establish permanent peacekeeping missions or not. And the peacekeeping budget is roughly $8 billion a year. And the UN regular budget is roughly $1.3 billion. So the peacekeeping budget is quite large compared to the regular budget. And our permanent members agreed to pay a higher share. But now the US is saying that's unfair, but they are forgetting that the US wields enormous power in the Security Council. And they have proposed elimination to UNFPA, UN Population Fund, because saying that the UNFPA promotes abortion. The UNFPA's policy is they support abortion where abortion is illegal, but if not, they don't. And instead they provide support to family planning, support to mothers and children. They're doing a lot of things, and the U.S. provides, I think, about $75 million a year. And the current administration is cutting that support. And also drastic change in the financial contributions cut to climate-related activities, including IPCC, the Global Environmental Facility, and so on. So this was actually the U.S. contribution to UN agencies, the UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA. UNDP, the U.S. has been the top donor, UNICEF the top donor, UNFPA fourth place. And instead, the current administration is proposing to allocate those resources to military, right? And the beneficiaries are military industry, as well as Egypt, Iraq, Israel, and so forth. Now, the regular budget assessment, the U.S. pays 22%. That remained the same. Japan used to be, and still actually the second largest contributor. Right now, 2017, Japanese contribution is 9.68%. The year 2000, Japanese contribution was 20%. So in 15, 16 years, the Japanese contribution has been cut by half because the Japanese economy stagnated for like roughly 20 years. And China has now taken over. China is third in regular budget contributions, but in peacekeeping, because China is a permanent member, China is now second place, largest contributor. So this is a peacekeeping assessment rates. US 28.47%, China 10.25%, Japan the same as the regular budget, 9.68%. So the assessments for the permanent members, P5, for UN peacekeeping, as you can see, added together, they provide roughly 55% of the peacekeeping budget. So the U.S. is now trying to reduce the whole peacekeeping budget, and the budget has come down a little, in fact, this year. Now, on the Japanese side, sorry, I'm taking a little time, but on the Japanese side, Japan's basic foreign policy is the first priority is US-Japan alliance, which is at the core of Japan's foreign policy because of security for Japan, as well as trade. The US still is the largest trading partner for Japan. And Japan shares a lot of common values: democracy, rule of law, human rights, and so forth. So there is every reason for Japan to be, the US to be Japan's foremost partner in the world. And then comes Japan's relations with Asian countries, because Japan considers itself an Asian power, so wants to improve relations with other Asian countries, but, and as you know, there are some difficulties with Korea and China, and so forth. Then comes multilateral diplomacy. Now, when Japan joined the UN in 1956, Japan's key word was UN-centered diplomacy. Putting the UN at the center of Japanese foreign policy, but that gradually changed, receded. And the symbolic sort of fact is that in 1960, the US-Japan Security Treaty was revised, and there was a huge domestic opposition, but it went ahead, which is still the basis of Japan's security and main core, the core of Japan's foreign policy. Now, Japan, as the second largest economy, has been seeking greater status in the UN. And one of the manifestations of that was to seek permanent membership in the Security Council, which has not succeeded yet. Now, in the beginning of the 1990s, Japanese catchword for seeking permanent membership was no taxation without representation. You know this. This is how the US came to be, right? And also, Japan started participating in UN peacekeeping operations because to attain the permanent status, Japan had to contribute more in that area. Now, lately, dealing with North Korea has been a big challenge for Japan as well. And now, how the UN has been useful to Japan. Now, as a second largest financial contributor, the UN has been quite useful in Japanese foreign policy, because it really gives Japan its international profile, status and profile, which is very important to Japan. As you remember, in the 19th century, Japanese foreign policy goal was to gain international status as an equal member of the international community. Because remember when Japan opened up in the Meiji era, Japan was forced to sign an unequal treaty with European powers. And Japan did a lot to modernize itself to gain international status equal to other major powers. So something similar is happening. And Japan, in fact, has been elected most frequently as non-permanent member of the Security Council. Last year and this year, Japan has been a non-permanent member of the Security Council, and this was the 11th time Japan was elected. Compared to other countries, Japan comes first. Now, the UN has been useful to Japan to deal with all sorts of domestic constraints in projecting its international profile and recognition, particularly in UN peacekeeping. And some opposition parties criticize government for not respecting the peace constitution, by projecting to try to participate in UN peacekeeping outside the boundaries of Japan. And the UN has provided a very good cover in a way for more active Japanese involvement overseas. And when it comes to North Korea, at the moment, applying economic sanctions is the practically the only way of dealing with North Korea. Now, that has not been successful yet, but right now there's a discussion as to whether the Security Council should impose an oil embargo, among others, which could be a quite serious impact on North Korea. But we don't know. We're going to discuss that later.
It's happening today.
Yeah, probably today we're discussing. So, I will somewhat skip here and now one other thing. This will be the last part of my presentation. The Japan's ODA has been declining, unfortunately. This is Japan's ODA from 1978 to 2017. And I believe in the mid-1990s, Japan's ODA contribution was very huge, number 2. And right now, Japan's ODA is roughly half of the peak period. And I believe the Japanese government is now trying to increase its ODA because the US has been retreating from international commitments like Paris Climate Change Accord and so forth. And Japan, together with the EU and other middle powers like Canada, will probably have to come in to pitch in to make up any shortfall in those very key and important areas of dealing with climate change and some other issues. So I hope Japan will increase its ODA. I will not go into those details, but that's about pretty much my introduction. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of things we want to discuss. Okay, I give the floor to the fellow.
Thank you. It takes courage to follow a hero. He's the smartest person I ever knew at the UN, and it's a big loss that he's still not there. I was just going to, I speak as a journalist, so therefore I'm not a scholar and I'm not a policymaker, but how it is to look at the UN as a journalist and its relations, especially right now with the US. Am I speaking in this the right way? Okay. I think that I was going to give some people, I don't know, do we have some journalists here or not, but what to look for now, and this is an extremely important 2 or 3 months coming up right now in United States politics, more important maybe even in the election last year. Some ways to look at the UN, and then I'll let us get on to questions. To start with Washington, where you are, of course, which is easy now in a way because there's so much coverage of the Trump administration in ways that not everybody's happy with. But from the UN's point of view, it looks like this will be the most threatening administration ever for the UN because on several fronts, and Hiro has outlined them beautifully. I won't go into all of them, but the interesting thing is that that Congress is fighting back. The national budget was supposed to be finished by the end of September. No way. That would put the United States government into, well, it would just cut off payments. The United States government would go into total default on October 1. The UN's budget is different from the American budget. So in Washington, the Congress now is at the center of this discussion. about a whole raft of things, tax policies, now other things pop up. The two huge hurricanes are going to demand billions and billions, maybe $1 trillion more dollars in reconstruction and assistance to people who have lost things, and to the infrastructure. So they have that. They still have a fringe that wants to repeal Obamacare before they come up with anything new. And I think we should call it the Affordable Care Act as often as possible, because the current administration likes to call it Obamacare, so they can blame Obama or whatever. It's the Affordable Care Act, and they are not likely to be able to do that. But they have piled up these things, and many of these things have been thrown at Congress by President Trump. Do this, and then when they don't do it, he lashes out at his own party leaders in Congress. And because this is not a parliamentary system, this is a problem for both sides. But he has made a very difficult job for Congress, where they already have splits. The Republican Party is split, the Democratic Party is split, and there's a big election coming up next fall. The House of Representatives, everybody has to stand for re-election. In the Senate, it's the third of the Senate, and they have 6-year terms. So whoever terms are up, then that seat is up for grabs. So both sides are worried about the next election. And this is an unnecessary mess that's been created in the White House. I said I would be more diplomatic, but I am a journalist. And in the House and Senate, people don't even understand what the strategies are, and let alone the public, the general public, or people in the UN don't know what is the strategy. They'll say, deal with this sanction on North Korea, or we will go it alone. What does go it alone mean? It could be a very, very dangerous idea. When you have an administration with people with basically no foreign policy experience or familiarity with the world, most of them, not all of them, and an ambassador in the UN who's never been anything but the governor of South Carolina. She said at the Council on Foreign Relations, I can deal with the UN, it's just like the South Carolina legislature. Okay, let's see, what can I skip here? I do want to underline what Hiro has said about the budget cuts. They are in discussion now because there is no, as I said, no federal budget, and there's not likely to be one. They have what they call a continuing resolution, which just keeps everything where it is, and come back to this in December, and then they have to come back to it after that because there's no agreement on many things. But the things that struck me about the budget cuts is that they go for the sense of cosmopolitan internationalism. They go for foreign assistance. They go for even international health programs. And in the United States, he wants to completely defund, which would wreck the endowment for the arts and the endowment for humanities. In other words, this is an anti-intellectual, anti-international mindset. And this can be dangerous for years to come. So this is a very interesting thing to watch because the Congress, especially the Senate, because they have 6-year terms and they can sometimes be a little bit more analytical, and they have more discussion and so on. It has got to act on this, and they're beginning, as you suggested, to do this. Now, the other thing that Hiro touched on, and I won't go back again, is that this business of not necessarily thinking that all Republican presidents, this is why I think that this is the most dangerous one, because he's got a right-wing Republican Congress. He's got a right-wing, basically, White House. And if you even want to call it that, that implies there's some political thinking going on. He's got this overwhelming need the overwhelming need to undo everything Obama has done, willy-nilly, as we say, whether it's reasonable or not. Apart from the other things Bill Clinton did as president, a liberal Democrat, was to dismiss Boutros-Ghali as a deal with Congress so he would get some of his domestic political aims through Congress. They ditched Boutros-Ghali literally on a night, Friday night probably, the night every night. They like to do this when they think no one's thinking about anything but the weekend. And so you can look at any administration that comes in and then and just wait and see. George W. Bush, I was in Afghanistan with the UN on opium eradication. They had a wonderful man who had been an inspector, or I don't know, he was the head of the police in Marseille, where a lot of drugs come into Europe. And he was convinced that the Bush administration was going to buy into a program big time on alternate crops, you know. They were working on this in the spring of 2001, and then came 9/11, and the whole thing, the whole atmosphere changed. But Bush, first thing he did really when he spoke to the nation was, this is not about Muslims. And he took off his shoes and he went to a mosque here in Washington to show that this was a fight against terror and not a fight against the Islamic religion. We don't see that happening anymore now. Let's see, the vacuum in the State Department is a serious consideration. And now the UN ambassador, to switch to the UN, the UN ambassador, the questions rise, to whom does this person report? Or what is this person's kind of brief? And it's not very clear. And now it's unresolved because there are lots of vacuums in the State Department where people have not been appointed. Some of them are having to take, and I use this, not in genuine terms, but kind of loyalty test to Trump in order to get State Department diplomatic jobs. So bad is it, and then the cuts to the State Department budget, which he proposed, that even the Secretary of Defense said this is not the way to go. We need more money in diplomacy so that I don't have to buy some more weapons. And so, even his own Secretary of Defense is worried about where things are going. And then, who staffs the UN mission? If any of you ever who are American citizens apply to work for the United States government, or you don't have to, well, I guess you have to be in the State Department, but the jobs at the UN mission are extremely important because New York is the center of world diplomacy. There is no two ways about it. And every mission has to have a whole lot of expertise on climate, on arms control, on development, on everything else. So this is a very important thing to watch if you're ever writing about or doing risk analysis. Who is making the policy in Washington and who is making it in New York? I think we'll skip to North Korea and China. You did. I just want to say a little bit more about the cuts that were proposed. As I said, they're anti-international and anti-intellectual, basically, cuts. Now, according to the latest news from Capitol Hill, apart from what Bureau said about putting money back into the State Department, which adding $11 billion to what Trump was willing to provide, they are now working on the UN Population Fund, UNFPA, is gone. I mean, basically, he eliminated it with one of the first executive orders in January. This is the organization that's the largest in the world on providing family planning and maternal health care at a time, and especially in Africa where the population is growing so fast. And it's not that it's a colonial thing to provide these things. It's just go around Africa. One of the things I've done since I retired from the Times was to do 2 round-the-world trips for the UNFPA, and just talk to the women. And I say send a woman to talk to the women, and you'd be surprised how much they will be hurt by this kind of thing. Somebody in the House of Representatives said he's against family planning because reproductive health will end up hurting mothers and children. Go figure. But no money from the U.S. to UNICEF. It's the World Food Program, UNESCO, that we're already $500 million in debt on an issue about Palestine. UN Women, the Human Rights Council, These are all things that the U.S. support could go, and in the Human Rights Council, the U.S. could simply withdraw. So, and that hasn't happened, or well, it didn't happen. John Bolton tried not to get the U.S. in it when it was first founded. So these things are worth watching. And I guess that's sort of. What was I going to say? Oh, Clinton. Yeah, you know, in fact, when Hiro was talking about Rwanda and the Mogadishu syndrome, he went farther. Madeline Albright has written about this and talks about it. She was an ambassador at the UN and was told not to use the word genocide. Do not ever use the word genocide because then we have to do something. And Clinton himself went down and apologized, you know, when how many 100,000 people were dead? 800,000. But this came from basically the White House. It was, again, using a hugely important international issue as a bargaining chip with domestic politics. And so this is, you know, this was, and so there you have a liberal Democrat. And as I said, on the other side, you have George W. Bush, who was he was a moderate to very conservative Republican, who was willing to work with the UN on the poppy problem and opium in Afghanistan until Al-Qaeda came along and blew up the World Trade Center and tried to do the same in Washington with the Pentagon, where it actually did hit it. So, you know, this is cannot be said too much. It's a profound shift in America since 1945, the end of World War II. And it's more so because there are younger people coming into the voting pool all the time, and if the message they get constantly from Washington is the UN is useless, the UN doesn't do anything for us to take our money, they're wasting it. You know, the late Jesse Helms, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, used to say we put money down a rat hole. And so, you know, these young people.
He changed his attitude.
Yeah, well, he's gone now, so we remember that. I think there's a genuine, the concern is growing in this country. You would all know this. You've been watching it probably close up. The question is, can Trump survive this year, let alone 4 years? But no matter how much, I'm talking not about his physical health, but about his political health. Because how much can Congress deal with before they realize that this is a very serious problem? And that's why I say no profound shift like this in since in 70 years, more than 70 years. And so that plus the low level of knowledge around the United States in the UN, not taught in schools much, if at all in most places. Very rarely reported on in local newspapers. It's just completely non-existent. So the only thing you get is these messages, particularly on social media, that trash the UN, and that's a very serious thing.
We have roughly 30 minutes, and because of time constraints, maybe I should ask maybe 2 questions, and then discuss and then move open the discussion to the floor. First, there's 2 questions. One is that regarding the doctrine of retreat. Do you think any possibility that Trump administration may change the doctrine of retreat? If so, what would be the cause? What would be the reason? If not, the next administration would change the direction? That's my first question. Second question is about the DPRK, North Korea. What would be the end game of the DPRK sanction in the UN, in the United Nations? Can you see the scenario at this moment?
I think you ought to be both.
Nothing is really written in stone. And Trump, if he finds the UN useful, and the UN could be to his advantage, I'm sure he will use it. That's what he's doing with regard to North Korea. because the sanctions imposed on North Korea come from the legitimacy of the UN and the Security Council under the UN Charter. And as long as he considers that as the best means in dealing with North Korea, he will use the UN. And I'm sure he'll be coming to the UN later this month. We'll find how he's received and how he sees the UN.
You can all watch that on TV.
Yeah, you can watch the TV.
Well, C-SPAN usually does it. C-SPAN usually does a live coverage here, and there is the web TV from the UN itself. It's next Tuesday, the 19th. He speaks second after the Brazilians, his tradition.
Next Tuesday.
Now,
Next Tuesday, 19th.
the North Korea, the new sanctions they are discussing involves this oil export, the ban on oil export. I believe China exports roughly 80% of oil that goes into North Korea, and the rest probably comes from Russia. So China will have to decide whether to support this new proposal by the Bush administration to cut oil. Now, this could be a very important and potentially it could decide whether we are going to war or not. You may remember that the Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was in a way precipitated by the decision to secure oil after the U.S. imposed oil embargo on Japan. And at the time they discussed whether they should go south or north. North meaning Russia, the Soviet Union, or south to Southeast Asia, where oil was at. And they eventually made the decision to go south and to be successful in securing oil in Southeast Asia was to block U.S. potential counterattack on Japan. And the best way to deal with that was to attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. Now, so oil embargo could have serious repercussions. In this case, North Korea. And already Kim Jong-un is threatening a significant retaliation should this new sanctions regime go into effect. Now, there seems to be some effort to water down the oil embargo, maybe partial. We don't find out. We are watching exactly what's happening in negotiations in the UN.
Just a report that just already had a watered down version.
Right.
I mean, it's not a total embargo. It's try to limit the oil import to export to North Korea.
Yeah. The other thing is that, of course, the U.S. and Japan and others consider China to be a key actor in this case, because China is seen as the only country that really has some influence on North Korea. Now, there's a question as to what extent China can influence North Korea. 20 years ago, I had a chance to visit North Korea as a member of the UN humanitarian delegation. And when the head of our delegation told the North Korean counterpart, look at China. China has introduced a market mechanism, and its economy started growing, and the standard of living has begun to go up. Then the North Korean reaction was, we are not China. Now, after Kim Jong-un, assumed his power, his uncle was executed, and many other chief of staff in the army and so forth. Everybody who was suspected of potential rival and potential supporter of the UN, of China, are no longer there. So, China has to decide in this situation. Of course, cutting oil would be devastating. Therefore, they have to think, North Korea already has nuclear weapons, and they could intimidate China as well, not just the US. So I think China is very, very cautious in this case. And so we are really waiting to see how China reacts to this new proposal. And partial or embargo may induce some change or may not. I tend to think they may not change North Korean attitude because I think they have a very clear decision to develop a full range of nuclear weapons as the best means of survival for the regime. Then they could negotiate, not before. That's my take. So we are facing a very dangerous situation in East Asia right now. China alone may not be able to change North Korean attitude. If a provocation occurs in response to the new economic sanctions measures, the U.S. may have to retaliate. That may lead to war. You never know. So we are very much concerned about the current developments.
Is there anything Japan can do at this moment?
No, Japan has already unilaterally imposed bilateral sanctions, but the effects are quite limited. And Japan has to rely on the UN as well, and the US. That's why the UN has become ever more important to Japan to legitimize its opposition to nuclearization of North Korea.